Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to ESG Talks, a KBRA podcast series focusing on environmental, social, and governance, ESG. This podcast series highlights various ESG hot topics and includes commentary from prominent voices within the ESG community. In this episode of ESG Talks, I interview Oli Newman, a Senior Credit Analyst at Fidelity International. Since joining Fidelity in March 2021, he has been responsible for the rollout of the firm-wide ESG framework across its private credit strategies, including CLOs, European Loan Fund, and Direct Lending Fund. Oli is also the co-chair of the European Leveraged Finance Association, ELFA's ESG Committee. This committee is focused on improving disclosure on ESG topics in the leveraged finance market and developing best practice guidance on ESG disclosures for sub-investment grade corporate borrowers. Oli and I discussed the integration of ESG into Fidelity's private credit strategies, his work on the ELFA ESG Committee, as well as KBRA and ELFA's upcoming ESG event in London on the 13th of September, where he will be a panelist. Hi, everyone. This is Emilie Nadler from KBRA's ESG team. Thanks so much for joining me today, Oli. I want to start by asking you about your role at Fidelity. You are responsible for applying the firm-wide ESG strategy across private credit. Can you talk more about that process of ESG integration and the progress that you've made since joining the firm?
Sure. So we joined the firm as a team back in March 2021. And the first thing that we did when we joined was to apply the way that Fidelity thinks about ESG in the public sphere. So it's fixed income and equities, and applying that to private credit. The way that that is done is by using exactly the same internal ESG rating system and framework that is used by the public asset classes. So importantly, we consider ESG at the time of our investments. So ESG does form a part of our investment committee discussions, and it's always considered before we make an investment. We very much see ESG as an enhancement to our credit process. We don't look at it separately, and it's not a bolt-on, it's integrated. And we think that by conducting ESG analysis in conjunction with our traditional credit analysis, then it makes us aware of all the potential risks for a credit. And just to give a couple of examples, if we're looking at a chemicals company that has lots of outstanding litigation cases or a poor hazardous waste policy, then this is something that could materially impact on the enterprise value, but may not ordinarily be considered absent of a tight ESG framework. And similarly, if an IT servicing company has loose cybersecurity and data protection policies, then with a lack of controls, then it will only be a matter of time before there's a serious incident. Again, that impacts enterprise value. So it's things like these which are fleshed out by conducting ESG at the same time as credit analysis. And if we think specifically about our CLO vehicles, so since we joined Fidelity, we've launched 3 Article 8 aligned CLOs. So CLOs don't fall within the SFDR regulation, but we manage them the same way that we do our other funds. So we say that they're aligned to Article 8, and built into the vehicles is a test effectively that our 50% of our portfolio needs to be good or better. And that's when each individual credit is scored on our internal framework.
Thanks for that. That's really helpful background information, and I think it seems like it pairs very well with KBRA's approach, which is really focused on risk management and how you think ESG factors may kind of affect the credit rating over the longer term, particularly with the examples that you gave. It's really kind of a risk management focused view. So this episode is kind of a little bit of a teaser for KBRA's upcoming ESG event with ELFA, but from your perspective, what do you think is the most important ESG data in the private credit space, and why?
I think the most important ESG data is probably the one that is, at the moment at least, the most measurable and seems to be the most widely measured, and that is carbon emissions. So we only have to look at the climate impact that the heating of the planet is having, and we've seen it again across Europe with the extreme weather that we've had over the summer. carbon emissions are a massive contributor to that. And it's only once we've built up a series of reliable data, particularly in private credit, that we'll know what to do with it and how we can, in my opinion, correctly incentivize companies to reduce emissions over time.
Definitely. That definitely makes sense. And what do you kind of see as the biggest challenge right now for ESG?
The biggest challenge, and again with my private credit hat on in particular, is data. There just isn't enough of it. It's not uniformly measured. If we think about carbon, there's many different ways of measuring it, and it's often misinterpreted when it's provided. Then you also have when information isn't provided, if people use estimates, then they're using different estimation methods. So it's all a bit not uniform, put it that way. And one of the key initiatives that ELFA has introduced has been the sector-based ESG fact sheets. So there are 16 of these fact sheets in total, covering one general sheet and 15 sector-focused ones across the most common sectors of issuance in leverage loans and the bond space. So the fact sheets incorporate all 14 mandatory PAI points into the document, as well as asking E, S, and G focused questions. And the logic of these fact sheets is if you have 30 lenders sending the same ESG questionnaire to the borrower rather than 30 different lender questionnaires reaching the borrower, then you're much more likely to have a response to the uniform questionnaire. And that goes on to another point, which is just that collaboration in this space is key, particularly when it comes to ESG and the structure of the loans that we're investing in, where each investor holds a very small percentage of the loan. We have to collaborate and agree common goals. So we're seeing a very good success rate with deals launching with those pre-filled ELFA ESG fact sheets now. So that's a positive.
That definitely is great news. I think one of the things we hear so much from investors, as you mentioned, is just the challenges with data. And even within carbon emissions data, which is kind of the most readily available, there's still so many challenges with unreliability, different ways of calculating, different ways of disclosing. So it is very exciting to see the progress that ELFA is making with some of their disclosure efforts. And that's a good lead into my next question, which is I'd really like to hear more about your role on ELFA's ESG committee. What are kind of the main objectives of the group, and what have been some of the highlights for you working on the committee?
Sure. So I joined the committee back in December last year, and we've been working on a lot of initiatives since then. Just to give you a bit of background, there's 63 member firms to ELFA. There are 95 people that are members of the ESG committee, and those 95 people represent 45 firms. So if you do a calculation, over 70% of ELFA members are part of the ESG committee. So it's the most popular one. I'd love to say it's because of the co-chairs, but I don't think I can quite take that one. It's obviously a very hot topic in the market. And then we've touched upon it already. Probably our most well-known piece of work has been the fact sheet series, which is the ESG questionnaires. We've released new versions of those at the beginning of this year. So we've been engaging with the sell-side banks to keep them up to date with the changes that we've made. I mentioned earlier that we have now incorporated the 14 PAIs. We are engaging also with private equity sponsors just to make sure that they are aligned to our thinking. We are working on a report to do with carbon reporting. So we have various different working groups within the committee. That's one of the initiatives that we're working on, publishing we call them insight pieces, which are thought pieces on carbon reporting. We also work with other industry bodies. We've worked with the LMA on some guidance on sustainability-linked loans. We've worked with ICMA also. We joint published the practical recommendations for high-yield sustainability-linked bonds back in May. Also work with various different ESG data providers. And coming up in the next couple of weeks, we have a climate workshop also for our members. So lots going on.
Definitely a lot happening and really highlights what you said before about the importance of collaboration. I think that is really what's going to move ESG forward in the best way. So my last question for you is slightly self-serving for KBRA, but what are you most looking forward to with our upcoming ESG event?
Well, I'm in a panel myself, so I'm very excited to be participating in that panel, which is entitled Enhancing and Accessing ESG Data in Private Debt. As we touched upon earlier already in this conversation, data and the availability of data is a huge topic area. If I'm going to be shamelessly self-promoting, I think it's going to be a great panel. So I'd encourage all the listeners to attend at 4:15 next Wednesday, 13th of September. But away from the self-promotion, there are two other great panels before my one. So Sabrina Fox, the ELFA CEO, is speaking on the first panel. And I believe you're on a panel too, Emilie?
I am, yes. So we're both involved in self-promotion for this episode because there will be a KBRA presentation with a little bit more details on how we incorporate ESG into our credit rating. So it should be a good one.
So yeah, lots of exciting discussion to look forward to. So I'm sure it's going to be a great event. And the first one you've held in London with ELFA.
Yes, exactly. So very exciting. Well, thank you so much, Oli. We really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and we're very much looking forward to the event next week.
Thank you for having me.
This concludes our episode. Please email esg@kbra.com with any questions or comments. We also encourage you to visit KBRA's ESG website at esg.kbra.com, where you can find ESG research related to the topics discussed in this episode, further details on KBRA's ESG approach, and other ESG-related media items. You can also join our mailing list to access our ESG Weekly Roundup newsletter.